Hey, it's Krista. Good morning. I am out on the porch today, and I wanted to show you that there is a little bit of proof that spring is coming. So I'm gonna just show you little plants. I don't know if you can see those. I hope you can see them. These little green things. They're the first little plants to come up in the springtime. And when I see those start to poke out, I know that spring is coming. And so I wanted to shoot a quick video for you out on the porch. I hope it is getting to be springtime where you're at. I'm going to try to put this in here carefully so there's not any shaking going on. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my story, my experience. If I haven't talked to you before, you may not know me. You see me do these videos, but you're like, who is this Krista person? Does she even have Meniere's? Does she even have any experience? And I just wanted to take a minute, maybe get to know you a little bit better. Maybe you can get to know me a little bit better out on the porch on the first day where it's not the first day of spring, but it feels like it's the first day of spring. Out on the porch. So a little porch talking today. I was diagnosed about 8 years ago, and I lived in an area. I'm in the middle of the country. I live in Kansas, and I lived in this area where there was a lot of really big buildings. And so each building had a lot of different people in it. So you would walk in, you would take the elevator, you would go up to the 5th floor. I was up on the 5th floor. And it was one of those old industrial elevators, right? So sometimes you get in there and the elevator doesn't work and you got to take the stairs. Sometimes you get in there and it's like those wooden elevators. You've got to, hold the bottom up, pull the elevator up, and then you hit the button. And little rickety, right? Each floor you go up there, you see neighbors. It was a fun experience. It can be a loud experience. And it was during that time when I lived in that area of town. I went to school as an artist, so I lived there because other artists lived there, and they were musicians, and we made art, and we would spend time on the weekend doing barbecues outside in the alley. It was a fantastic time. And it was around that time that I started having very intermittent vertigo issues. I would notice all of a sudden that my ears kind of plugged, and what does that mean? But life was fast. I didn't really pay attention to it. And so I would notice that maybe my ear had been plugged, say, for a week, and I kept thinking, well, when did I get water in it? Why would it be plugged right now? And then it would just kind of go away. And then I would have these vertigo spells. I would, literally not be able to walk, not be able to turn around and move my head for about 8 to 10 hours at a time. And I had one of those, and then months would go by, and I would have another one of those. And at the time, I wasn't a big fan of doctors. So I didn't go to the doctor. I figured, well, they're not happening very often. I'm not going to really worry about it. And life would go on. And then when I knew, then there was, I think we all have this, where there was the time or the day that we knew that we had a problem. Maybe we had some symptoms. They didn't happen very often. And then one day we knew that something bad was coming down the road. And my version of that was I was having dinner with my neighbor that lived in the same building. She lived downstairs. We were eating out at a restaurant, and we were having a really good time. There may have been a little bit of wine that was being drunk there, but nothing crazy. And in the middle of that conversation, all of a sudden, the room started to slowly start to turn. It started to where I didn't have control of my environment. And it was the very first time that had ever happened to me. In my mind, I go through did I do this? What's wrong with me? Did I have too much to drink? Did I eat today? Is it something in the food that I'm having at dinner time? And what am I going to do at the same time that all of this very fast conversation is happening at the table? And in my mind, I began to plan how I was going to get home, because I didn't know if I would be able to actually stand up and walk out of the restaurant. And I was there. I had a good friend of mine that was there. She had some of her family that was there. And it increased to the point where I knew I had to get home, and I had to get horizontal. I couldn't engage anymore. And as embarrassing as that was, because I like to be known as the person that was always the last person standing. I was always the overachiever. I could out-talk. I could outlast anybody. I had pride issues. And it was difficult for me to become that person, that vulnerable person that needed to be helped. But I knew that in any second right now, I was going to be on the floor. And so I asked the people around me, I said, I'm not going to be able to stand here for another 2 minutes. Can somebody take me home? Thank goodness we were like 5 minutes from where I was living. And I got help to get in the elevator and go up to my 5th floor apartment. And that was the last day of my life as I knew it. That beautiful innocence that we have, where we feel like we can do anything. We get up, we plan our day. There's no serious thinking. There was no serious thinking on my mind. I think my days were about what movie am I going to watch, who am I going to meet, what kind of artwork am I going to create. After that day, it became a very serious stream of doctor visits, terror, anxiety, hiding away in bed. I completely stopped calling everybody I knew. I had a big friend base. I stopped calling all of them. People would ask me how I was doing. I didn't know how to respond. I was angry, and I stopped talking to them. I would pass, on days where I was driving, I would pass somebody on the road that I used to be with, that I used to spend time with. They would say, "What happened to you? Where have you gone?" And I couldn't even express myself. I just would use these little excuses to get back home and in bed. I was so afraid of eating that I was so afraid that what I was eating was going to contribute to more episodes. I was having 3 to 4 episodes a week. I was working 5 days a week on a computer. That was also agitating. But I was so afraid that I stopped eating. And I got to where I couldn't really be out of bed, not just because of anxiety, but because I was so weakened. If you're aware of what happens when you have too little sodium, you start to get chills, you lose energy, you can't move around. And it was about that time that my brother came up. I don't have family that lives around me, and I didn't have family that lived around me then. My brother came up to visit me, and I was either in the bathroom or I was in bed. And it wasn't because I was in a Meniere's episode, it's because I just wasn't eating enough. And I was terrified to eat anything. I think I was eating like lettuce leaves. And so he actually, one day that he was there, he forced me to eat this plate of eggs. And after I finished it, it sounds easy to say now, but at the time when I was in the middle of that fear, it was an incredible experience to have a simple plate of eggs, have somebody there in the room with me just in case something bad happens, and feel better because I had actually eaten something. And so these little secret fears that us Meniere's people go through that's those kinds of stories. Is who's going to be in the room with me if I eat this plate of eggs and I'm not going to be able to walk anymore, and I won't be able to walk, and I won't be able to work, and I won't be able to earn money, and I'll be on the street homeless. I lived with those thoughts every single day. On the way to work, You know, between the before the diagnosis and the after the diagnosis. Before the diagnosis, I would stroll into work. I would talk to people. We would hang out at work. We would talk about what everybody was doing on a Friday. After the diagnosis, I would very carefully, in terror, take that elevator down, hope to gosh I didn't see any of my neighbors. And this was not Meniere's episodes. This is daily chronic anxiety. Take that little elevator down, walk out the front door, hope I don't see any neighbors. There's 5 floors of neighbors. Everybody wants to run at you, see how you're doing, have a conversation. Every morning when I'm going into the office, I say, oh, I really hope I don't see any neighbors. I'm coming down the elevator. I'm hoping the elevator's working so I don't have to take the stairs. I get into the car. I think the drive between where I was living and my job was probably a 3 to 5 minute drive. And every minute of that drive, when I would pull up to a stop sign, high anxiety. I would pull into the parking lot, and between the parking lot and the walk into my office, it was probably, I'm going to guess, about maybe 25 or 30 steps. And after the fear of coming down the elevator and walking to the car and taking the 3 to 5 minute drive to my workplace and finding a parking space, at that point, I am already highly anxious. I'm already overwhelmed just by the thoughts in my head. The day hasn't started yet, and I have that walk to do between the parking lot and the office. It's about 25 steps. On the days where I'm not having a Meniere's episode, the anxiety is so high that I'm making myself dizzy. It's hard for me to look up and look down the street to see if people I work with are coming down the street. I'm in terror of having to have a conversation. You know, I'm in terror of having to run into my boss and have conversations about work that I wasn't really capable of doing anymore. You know, I was burned out. I worked at a computer. It bothered my eyes. There was more than one time that I would stay in that office and not be able to look at the computer because my eyes are moving around. I'm dizzy, right? And so there was nobody around. There was nobody to call. There was only me and those thoughts that I had. And I wanted to come and talk a little bit about that because of how bad it was. And I wanted to come and talk about what these kinds of things mean, the catalyst for these fears. I mean, Meniere's episodes, I'm going to put those aside for a minute because there's clarity around what those mean. You know, it means that you are going to go into a extreme night of hell, you know, for 8 to 12 hours or however long they're going to last. You don't really ever know. You're going to have experiences where you're going to lay on one side of your body for an extended period of time because if you turn your head, at least was my experience. If you turn your head, you're going to get sick. For me, if I could just keep my head quiet, if I could keep it really still, and I would go into this breathing pattern, then I could most of the time avoid just the having to throw up a lot, which was my main concern when I'm laying there having a Meniere's episode. I'm saying over and over in my head, please don't get sick, please don't get sick, please don't get sick. That is the longest night of the soul that the poets never, ever ran into. You're never going to see any artist or musician that have looked into the valley of pain like us in a Meniere's episode. So, but those are clear in the way that we know what that means. We know what that feels like. And so I'm just going to take those and set those aside for just a minute, because what I want to talk about is some of these other things that Meniere's means that we don't really talk about. Some of that is the vague anxiety. You know, my days back then, when I would start at the beginning of a work day and I was completely by myself. I don't believe I don't believe I had anybody around me that could help me, not emotionally, not physically. I mean, I had people that could walk me home if I needed that, and I did many times. But from the beginning when I got up to the end of the day was this stream of, I call them vague because wasn't even aware of what those thoughts were saying about myself, about my situation, about possibilities, and about life, and about how big of a change that was between my life before I got the diagnosis and the life after I got my diagnosis. After the diagnosis, I fell under the water. I was completely submerged. I couldn't really tell you what was on my mind from morning until night because it was all under the water, because it was too darn scary to take a look at, for one thing. And I didn't know how to look at it because how would I? I had gone to the doctor, I'd gotten the diagnosis, I'd gotten the medications, but I did not get any hope of my situation changing. And so I think when I was underneath that water, I think that what was subconsciously occurring to me was that, why look at it? If I put a clear eye on it, it's going to be so terrifying, and I'm not going to be able to do anything about it, that it's just going to be too much. And so I didn't look at it. I lost years of my life. I think there were absolute. I think there was probably, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years where I can't even remember how I spent my time. There were many long days of morning till night on the days that I didn't have to work, where I would like steal across the street, hoping to avoid my neighbors, to get little snacks at the convenience store. I mean, like pizza, right? Things that are not good for me because I was so overwhelmed. This sounds crazy. I was so overwhelmed. I didn't have the space of mind to actually get in the car and drive to the grocery store, which is probably a 15-minute drive. So I would steal over there, grab some snacks, right? Come back, and then the rest of the day is kind of a blur. You know, I would watch the sun go down. If I was able to look inside myself and understand how I was feeling, I would probably consider it as despair. As, you know, going out in the world was fear, and staying inside and away from the world, estranged from the world, in exile from the world, felt like despair. It felt like a constant falling. I'm not like that anymore, and I don't like to stay very long in sad moments, but I do believe it's important to acknowledge them and to recognize them and to see them, because to think about years of life being lost because we aren't living is, it's not acceptable to me. So if we put words to it and we not necessarily categorize it, but if we term it and we acknowledge it and we admit to it, we don't ever have to admit that we're bad people. You know, I may have been underneath the water, I may have been in a large sea of despair, but I never stopped being the person I was before I got the diagnosis. I just had a catastrophic thing happen to me with no known way to get out of it. And so, I want to talk about these other areas that it means. Meniere's means that it's an identity crisis. You know, who are we? Who are we if we're thinking about Meniere's 100% of the time? And the pressure and the desire and the loneliness we feel to connect to a world that doesn't understand us, who is that person? Meniere's takes that away from us. It has that effect on us. we are probably one of the only groups of people who can't make plans. Well, I know that we're all different. A lot of us can't make plans a week in advance. We don't know how we're going to feel. The rest of the world can make plans day in and day out, planning vacations, planning retirement. We can't plan. We don't feel comfortable planning. What does that mean for us and how we get through the world? So there's that part of it. There is our relationships. How do we talk about, how do we become interested in other people and able to talk and connect to where they're at when we are in this constant bizarre sea of these shadowy thoughts between fear and despair? How do we connect to people? How do people connect to us when it's so mysterious what's going on in our mind that we can't even express it to the other person so that they can understand, so that they can be there? If we could find the right words, how would they be able to understand enough to be there for us? What is the bridge between our experience and their experience? And so there's that. So if you take the actual Meniere's episodes and you take the lack of being able to bridge and connect to other people in our relationships, you take away the fact of who we are, who are we really, underneath the episodes, that thinking, going between despair and fear, who are we really? You really come up with a life that is, and I'm an artist, right? So I like hero's journey ideas. I love hero's journey movies. I like the idea of poetry where people express words that ends up being a song that equals an experience. Like, what does experience really look like? What is looking at nature? What is that really like? And so what we have is a group of people that don't have enough support, that are going through this strange experience of a shadowy, unexpressed identity, character, not being able to be there or fully express relationships. And all of that fear and turmoil is under the water. It's hard to even put a name to it. So we have this almost vague existence of fear being run around by when the next episode is coming. That is the experience that we go through as Meniere's people. And I think that the community doesn't talk about the experience enough. I think that the community talks about symptoms. And we all know what the symptoms are, but the question is, how do we go through the experience? How do we become who we are? How do we become who we are, even though, it becomes an even though we have this other thing that we have to think about? How do we become a better person next year than we are today, even though we have this Meniere's experience to go through? How do we get a little bit more clearer in the next few months about who we are and how we're expressing ourselves and the choices that we make? How do we become consistent in what we decide to choose? How do we choose who we're surrounded by when it seems like we don't have a choice on that, because we need to surround ourselves by people who can be there for us if we're ill? How do we get back a sense of control? And I am, of course, not the same person I was when I started. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here speaking with you today. So I know that it's possible. And I don't necessarily mean it's possible to have miraculous recovery or the right medication or the right supplement. What I really mean is that it's possible to start choosing our own experience in life, because the Meniere's episode experience has this bad collection of these awful shadowy things that happen, but there is also this other thing that happens, you know, care and concern for others, authentic interest in another's experience, because we know how hard it can be. You know, if you've gone through a few long nights of the soul with these Meniere's episodes and you talk to anybody else who's had any kind of a difficult experience, there's an instant bond there, right? I don't believe I've had the kind of bonds before I was diagnosed that I have afterwards, because my eyes were opened, right? And there are other very beautiful things that come out of bad experiences. That's why I like Hero's Journey, the topic of Hero's Journey, the unintended hero that through going through their own personal experience and their own personal anguish has become this person that people look up to, this very strong person, the person who has to find the right way to eat and the right way to think, because nothing else is going to help us get through this experience. The people who have the strength to do that are a lot stronger than other people. And it's interesting because you will see that when you become that person, it's easy to get a little bit less patient with people that maybe are not as adapted at following through as somebody who has, I call it the tiger that's rushing at you, right? It's like all of my life, I think I woke up with Cheez-Its, a bag of Cheez-Its, and a big cup of coffee with a bunch of like powdered creamer in it, and cigarettes every morning. Always, every morning I thought, you know what? Someday this is going to kill me. Someday this is going to kill me. And it was when I got home from that doctor that I began taking the kind of steps that were required to get through this experience. So a lot of words on that. I wanted to share what this thing is about. I didn't want to put down a bunch of stuff like, do this. Here's some, top 3 tips. Because really, that is BS. There are the things that we do, but underneath that, there's the building of the character that's going to take the steps to do that. And I wanted to talk about that, and I wanted to put some words to that, so that maybe in your experience, maybe you can find that within yourself, the groundedness that can't be destroyed by a Meniere's experience. You'll find that. You find that, and then that inner groundedness is what gets you to take these steps that used to seem so hard, but now they get easier because the experience is harder than the steps you got to take. Life is interesting that way. In the next week or so, I am going to be starting a new group. It's a group coaching program, but what it's about is I'm going to take 4 or 5 people, and we're going to get this inner core of us stronger by learning by reducing anxiety, sharing experiences, unearthing the real identity and expressing that, balancing work and rest in a way that people feel that they're able to rest from the doing, but there's also being, so that the life is worth living. I'm going to start offering that here in about a week or so. If that's something that's interesting to you, the first 2 people who join the group, I'm going to give a pretty good discount to. If that's something you're interested in, just let me know in the comments. And it was nice hanging out with you today. I haven't really taken the time to sit and really talk about these thoughts about Meniere's that are sometimes hard to put words to, but I wanted to do that today. The first really sunny day where it's possible to sit out on the porch, and I'm just going to take the camera off and show you the trees are not leafing yet, but they promised me they're coming. So I'm just going to take this out, let you know what the porch looks like. I'm going to do some more videos out here as spring and summer comes. So I'm just going to try to do this as easily as possible. I don't know if you can see that. It's a lot of brown. We're in Kansas, so we don't get a lot of pine trees. At least where I live, anyway. But, anyway, that's that. Say hi. Here's Maggie. Anyway, I hope you're having a good day. I hope your symptoms are low. I will see you soon, and let me know how you're doing. Okay, have a good one. Bye-bye.